Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to Wine, Crime, and Mystery. I am Danielle, and I am so glad that you guys are here with me. Let me know if you guys have seen my other videos yet. If you haven't, please make sure you check them out. I will be putting the links below. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channels. I am attempting to come to you weekly, so hold me accountable. So let's get started. Today we're going to talk a little bit about Hill House. Hill House is a home that's on the famous Dice Road. And I picked this particular paranormal story simply because it's not a million people telling the story. So I wanted to bring it to you today. But before we go right into that, I want to share with you exactly what I'm drinking today. So I have the Winking Owl, red wine, sweet red wine. And I actually purchased this as a recommendation from a friend from Aldi. It was very inexpensive, and in comparison to wines that I've had that are $10, $14, $19, is very good, and it was only $2.50. So it was well worth the purchase, and I went and bought a couple, and I encourage you to do the same while you drink safely. So let's get started. As I previously mentioned, I chose this story because I didn't see a lot of information of people doing similar stories about it on the internet. And also there is a documentary slash movie about it on Amazon, which I used as part of my research, in which the pieces that I used from it, I will kind of highlight and draw some conclusions and give some opinions about that. But also what ultimately caught my attention is because, let me back up. Because with a lot of paranormal activity stories and homes, there's always this array of, is it real or is it fake? Did that really happen? But what garnered my attention so much is the amount of police activity that was surrounding this home. And it wasn't only the local police, it was state, it was federal, other district police officers, churches, organizations, universities, yes, universities, that were all involved in the case and the paranormal activity that was happening around this house. And so I want to kind of give you some of the setting of some of the things that happened. So I will start off kind of telling you about the town. So the town is Iva. It's an unincorporated town today, and it is inside of Richland Township, which is also in Saginaw County. Now, the house itself is in Merrill, the city of Merrill, which is in Jonesfield Township, which is also in Saginaw County. Now, another reason this story interested me is because I had never heard of it before, frankly, and I'm from Detroit, Michigan, and normally, which is not odd that I wouldn't have heard of it, because mostly when people live in the city of Detroit, now this was back when I was younger, people venture out now, but when I was younger, if you lived in the city of Detroit, you stayed in the city of Detroit. You didn't venture out to the wildlands. And so you may have gone to little suburban cities around Detroit, but you didn't really venture out too far. So the fact that I had never heard of it is not abnormal, but nevertheless. So in the town of Iva in 1845, they had an outbreak of viruses and plagues. It is said that the people of the town had contracted smallpox, malaria, and some other plague. And so the way they dealt with it is that they did not allow, it sounds very similar to what's kind of going on now, but I hope that it doesn't end the same. But they wouldn't allow people in the town to go outside of that city of Iva, and unless you lived there, you could not go inside. So the way that they decided to also eradicate these plagues that were affecting this town of Iva was to burn it down. And so it is said that, children, women, and men were buried alive in this town, along with their buildings and businesses and homes. Now, I don't necessarily know how true that is, because I did not find any information that mentioned a huge fire like this would have been anywhere around that place. And there's an historian named W.G. Shannon who, just told the history of these to, this town and the surrounding area. He told in chronological order the history and what was going on, and if you like old stories, this was a read. And as I was going through it, I didn't see anything that mentioned, small little fires here and there, but not a big fire which would have killed these children, these women, and these men, businesses, and all of this. So, it goes to say, I don't know how true it was. But also, in this particular, and that's in those two neighboring cities, there's this 13-mile road called Dice Road. And on this road, not only was there paranormal activity that was happening at this particular house on Dice Road, but it is also said, and even today, that people will show that there is a general store that is also said to have been haunted. There is a cemetery, which if the people had died in Iva Town, they would have been buried in the cemetery. There's Anna Rose, a young lady who hung herself, that haunts the cemetery there also. And then there's this bridge where people have been said to have hung or died near this bridge. So that's the haunted road of Dice Road. It's just a haunted road. But in researching this particular case, and about Saginaw County, there were so many hauntings in different places all over Saginaw County. And I'm like, why is there so much paranormal activity happening in Saginaw County, Michigan? So let's get on with the story. The house on Dice Road was built in 1951 by Harold Pameraning. He built that home prior to getting married. Once he married his wife, Mabel, they moved into this house together, and they had 2 kids. The first son was born in 1953. 1953. And the second son was born in 1955. And in this house, the closest neighbor is about a half a mile to a mile away. And so you'll hear me talk about neighbors visiting or being somewhere near, but just in context, they are a half a mile to a mile away. So that's how far spaced the houses were. So they lived in this house happily for 20 years without incident. And one day, one of the neighbors came to the house, a lady who lived like across the street, but not literally across the street. And she knocked on the door. And she came and she requested Mr. Pameraning. She said, I want to buy your house. And he told her, I'm not interested in selling my house. So she left. They continued on with life. Then there's another knock. Months later, This time, the lady from across the street was more insistent. Like, I want to buy your house now. Like, you have to give me this house. And he was like, no, you need to get your ass off my property. I am not selling my house. I have purchased this beautiful house for me and my family. No, you can't have it. Get off my property. Of course, they had exchanged some nice little words, and she left. Now, this particular lady and her house, other neighbors in the documentary described her as a witch. One of the neighbors stated that this particular lady told her that she was an ordained witch.
She was seen several times coming out of the Dice Road Cemetery at odd hours of the night.
She did tell me that she was an ordained witch.
I believed it. After going through it, I believe there was witchcraft.
They said on her house there was 3 X marks on the house. And, you know, later in the documentary, it was stated that X's meant something worshiping. I don't know. I could be saying it wrong, but it just wasn't nice stuff. Devil, witches, worship, who knows? But it wasn't nice. So after the lady left, that is when the family started having problems with the house. On the first night of the first occurrence that the Pomeranians had was knocking on the walls. Well, Mr. Pomeranian thought that someone was knocking on the outside of his house. So he thought that there was burglars or, people or someone trying to get into his house. So he immediately called the police. And, he called 911 and told them that an intruder was trying to get into his house and was beating on his outside walls, and that they needed to hurry up and come and figure out what was going on, or at least, at the very least, arrest the person that was trying to break into his home. So, it's July 1974, and this is the first incident that has occurred. And the first officer to arrive at the house was Mr. Frisbee. And this would be one of many visits Mr. Frisbee would have at the Dice Road home. So when Mr. Frisbee arrives at the home, he takes a visit around the home, and he found that no one was there. He checked, he looked, and he didn't find anything. Mr. Pomeranian heard more knocking at his house on the outside of his doors. And for the second incident that occurred at Mr. Pomeranian's house, Mr. Frisbee showed up. Now, today Mr. Frisbee is a retired police officer. He retired in 2000. And so when he showed up, he walked the house because Mr. Pomeranian had heard more knocking around his house. So Mr. Frisbee takes a walk around, and he didn't hear anything. He goes into the home to talk to Mr. Pomeranian. And while he's in there, he's talking about all of the things, and he's explaining to him that I didn't see anything. Mr. Pomeranian is upset because he's like, I know I heard knocking. So in that instance, while Mr. Frisbee is there, well, I'll say Officer Frisbee is there, he notices, they're talking, and all of a sudden the picture falls all off of the wall. Strange occurrence, but it doesn't mean anything. They continue to talk or whatever, and a cup falls off of the table. So after that time, he noticed that weird, uncomfortable, did you see what I see type of thing. Mr. Pomeranian didn't really believe in the paranormal. It was just like a freak incident that happened.
I don't know how to explain it, but I'll tell you one thing, I saw it.
And so after that, as I stated, there would be, Mr. Pomeranian would call the police almost every day, every other day, every week, multiple times a week. and you can see the police reports. That's the incredible part about this story, that every time one of the officers came, there was a police report to document the findings. So the Pomeranians made so many calls to the police and it became frustrating, because now I'm starting to feel like, am I crazy? But everybody else in my family is hearing this. So Mr. Pomeranian is out of the house. It's October the 31st on Halloween. Ooh. And Mrs. Pomeranian and one of the sons are in the house, and they hear noises. Someone outside. So they call the police for who knows the 100th time by now. And they didn't know at the time, but the police had been, because so many calls had been coming in, the police did a stakeout of the house. So they just sitting outside the house watching. So when the police were called, they were already at the house.
Did that stakeout, which by the way happened to be Halloween night,
Right.
October 31st, 1974.
Yep.
When they were doing that stakeout and the pounding started to happen, the captain was getting over the radio and saying, it's happening right now.
Right.
And everybody out there that was surrounding the house, even though they were so close, couldn't hear a thing.
Couldn't hear nothing, no.
But yet through the radio, when he was talking through the radio, they could hear the pounding in the house through his radio, which to me is fascinating, because you guys are all hearing it. He's hearing it, and that's why he's calling in the squad to find the SOB doing it.
Right.
And they're outside in in a rural area, quiet as can be, 10 yards from the house, and there's not a sound.
Right.
Not a sound.
No.
So that was like one occurrence, but that was one of many occurrences that had happened and no one saw anything. As I previously stated earlier in the beginning of this story, with so many things coming on, and with so many incidents occurring and happening, that the multiple police units were brought out. It was the Michigan State Police, the FBI, and there was an incident where the toilet paper roll in the Pomeranian's house had caught on fire and burned completely charred. And they brought in Duke University to try to recreate the situation of the toilet paper burning, and they could not reenact that happening. The toilet paper did not burn the same way it did. So they can only just associate it with a weird occurrence. The neighbors, they, not the witch lady across the street, but the other neighbors, they had really good relationships with. And they stopped coming to the Pomeranian's house because they were scared that they would be cursed just from being in the house. So they decided that they wasn't going to come anyway. There were some cops that had been in the house and had experienced some of this traumatic events that had occurred, and they would no longer ever come back to patrol that house ever again. Also, there was one incident where there was a guy who was experienced in eliminating spirits from homes. Well, he came into the home, and with I think it was his son that he came with. And when they left and they went back to their own home, they started hearing knocking at their house. And they took that as a sign. He is this guy who is supposed to remove spirits, and he's like, I'm not going back to that house. So there was an article placed in the newspaper, which I'll put over here, on January the 21st of 1975. And in the article, it talked about all the paranormal that was occurring in the house. It stated that, in the article, it stated that the police, even though they had saw some of the occurrences, there was an officer who said, oh, we still don't think it's paranormal. blah, blah, blah. And that the owners are very shooken and scared, which that made Mr. Pomeranian not necessarily feel like a man who can protect his home, and he was furious.
Get an idea of what this story was stating.
Sure.
For people. First of all, the headline, Haunted House Remains a Mystery at Merrill. Merrill's haunted house is still a mystery. After 6 months, police still do not have an answer. Weird sounds, voices, furniture moving, strong vibrations and explosions from unknown sources, whole house shaking and jumping, cracks in the wall, plaster falling. This has been going on in July for a bewildered family in rural Merrill. State police from Lansing have had special equipment in the house for 2.5 weeks, checking the source of the trouble. They were unable to find any success. Before that, to check it all out, police stayed in the house overnight. The power and utility company and telephone company used special equipment to locate the source. Still nothing. So again, just reiterating the fact that they were doing everything in their power. They were bringing out the telephone company. They were bringing out the gas company, the electric company, trying to find what was causing these blasts or explosions that you guys were all witnessing and the police were actually witnessing, and nothing.
Well,
Attracted a bunch of people to the area at the corner of the house, riding by, honking horns, yelling things out their car, which no one wants to have, especially in you live in the country where houses are half a mile or a mile away. You don't want people, all of that attraction, all of that attention. And because everything that was going on, they didn't want all of that attention going on. So, yeah, it was heavy in the house, and, they were rightly upset because they didn't know exactly what was going on. But, finally, the Pomeranians was forced out of their home in 1975. So this incident lasted for 2 years. They was forced out of their home due to a fire. Very similar to the same fire that happened with the roll of tissue. It was like it was a test occurrence that had happened. Let's test this roll of tissue and see what we can do. And so what they say is that the home burnt at the seams, where like in the seams of the wallpaper, it started burning there. And so the house wasn't livable at the time, but it gave them a reason to go ahead and live. Mr. Pomeranian went on to, after the incident, have a breakdown, and then he ended up having a heart attack before dying. And so it's just a sad thing of, here's this man who had been fine, had a loving family, enjoyed his family, his wife and his 2 kids, but because of these unfortunate incidents had to live this life of horror. His wife Mabel ended up also dying in 1986. It was sad because they, you think of having this American dream home, and then such a traumatic incident happens that takes that away. But, and the 2 boys, left. They ended up selling the home to a couple, and I don't want to mention their names because which I'm not going to mention the address of the property or their names, but they ended up selling the home to a couple who renovated the home, because remember it was burned, so they renovated it and they moved in with their 2 kids. Now, the owners of this home stated that they hadn't really witnessed anything that the Pomeranians had witnessed. But I find it very curious, or weird, that in a documentary that the daughters of the husband and wife, they stated that in fact they had experienced some things. Now, these people, at the time that this documentary occurred, which was in 2016, they had been living in this house for 36 years. And so the daughters mentioned that they would see, flashes of light every blue moon. And that one daughter said that she had saw like a man's face in the window, like a glowing white face in the window. and that freaked her out. And the two daughters' kids also have very similar experience. Now, the haunting or the paranormal activity that is occurring in this house did not occur at the same level as it did when the Pomeranians lived there. So, you know, I don't know. It's interesting because in the documentary, they brought in a psychic that stated that as long as the original family, none of the members of the original family that lived in the house, as long as they didn't return to the house, then it was fine, because it looks as though the haunting was just on that family. But there's still spirits there, so it's so confusing. But in the documentary, I swear that one of the sons came back into the house. So I wonder if, now it's 2020, did any of this stuff continue to go on? Did it stop? Did it, you know, what happened? And so it was just, that is very interesting and to me that she said that and that they had been there. Also very interesting. You know, when these film paranormal groups do these films or these documentaries, I don't necessarily believe half the crap that be in them. But I do believe what occurred in this home occurred in this home. Now, during the documentary, if you just happen to check it out, they will show you footage of ghostly sightings in the home. I don't necessarily believe that was real or not. They will also somewhere at the end, like they go in, I think it's an EFT machine. I think that's what it's called. I could be wrong. Please, if you know what it's a machine that kind of detects energy, I guess, sources. But they did this in the bathroom. So one guy is in the bathroom checking the energy sources, and the machine is going off, right? It's going off. And he has the guy that's below in the crawl space, and his machine is going off. So he starts to dig, and he finds this jar. When they bring the jar up, the jar has a name on it. So remember the 3 crosses that I told you that was on the witch's house? Well, the jar had the 3 X's, and it had Harold Pomeranian's name on it. And so I don't know if that was fake. They probably put that there as a prop to sell more of their show. It was just weird. I didn't believe it at all. But when we talk about like the real estate of this area, remember in the beginning I spoke about all of the things that occurred on this 113-mile road, where, you know, there is the cemetery, there's the ghost of Anna Rose, there's the bridge, there's the general store. The values in the home, you know, when you think of when the market was at its highest at about 2005, and you know, the market dipped, and then now the market is higher than it was in even 2005, but the property values in this particular area have not skyrocketed, and it just makes you think about, is it because of all of the ghostly sightings? You know, are people afraid? Clearly, people aren't afraid to live in houses where there is paranormal activity, because the sellers, the people who moved into the Pomeranians' house, they already knew that there had been some, because I think it was the wife, she was from the area, so she already knew paranormal activity had been occurring in the house, and she was still okay with moving there. And so, you know, is it because that the values don't spike up that, you know, didn't raise? Is it because all of the ghostly activity? Or is it just because it's in a rural area and prices just don't increase that fast? So I am going to leave this here. I plan to do a small little short story on Anna Rose because I found her story so interesting and so kind of heartbreaking that I'm really compelled to tell her story. So please subscribe. Please ring the bell so you can get notifications when I drop a new video. And I hope to see you soon. Bye.